welcome to this episode of DevelopSec. Today I want to talk about the Facebook breach that is making its ways all across the internet. It happened a few days ago, so there's lots of blow up about it. I like to wait a little bit, do a little bit of analysis to see what's going on before I start sharing some thoughts on this and really determine what type of information I want to share with everybody regarding the information that we have available. Now, of course, I don't have access into the intimate details within the organization of what they do. And to be honest with you, I'm not really a Facebook user, so I don't log into my Facebook account. You may see if you have me as a friend on Facebook that I do post some stuff when I have a new blog, when I have a new episode of the podcast. I have those posted out there. I actually do that through a third-party component, so I don't ever actually log in. So I couldn't tell you much about how the settings work within Facebook, so we're going to make a little bit of assumption there. But a lot of what we're talking about doesn't really matter as far as that. But what I want to talk about is kind of what happened, maybe answer some questions about maybe how it could have got passed and how we didn't know about it for so long, or they didn't know about it for so long, and some things that maybe we can do within our own organization to try to help so we don't run into these same type of situations with our own applications, putting our organizations in the forefront of the news. So if you haven't heard yet, and I don't know why you wouldn't have, but basically Facebook had a breach. There was an issue. They have a feature on their app that allows you to do a view as, so you can view what your page will look like from somebody else viewing it. And on that, they had the upload document functionality. And with that came the creation of an access token in the person that you're viewing the page as, or that you're trying to view the page of. So it actually, through all these different components, now this isn't the simple little, oh, I just change an integer and I've gained access to somebody else's account, right? There's a lot of different pieces here that run in combination that allow this vulnerability to exist. And we found out the vulnerability existed since about mid 2017. So it's been out there for a little while and yet to be found. So something I want to talk about there too a little bit later. So we have this functionality that when you put it all together allows me, the attacker, the ability to grab an access token of another user and be able to then access and view their account. Now, I'm not grabbing their password. This is not a vulnerability in which the password is released, right? We got this access token that was created that now when I set that in my browser or configure it when I make my requests, I now have the capability to basically hijack a current session and view the system as that user. Okay, so first thing I want to point out there is this did not expose, from what they've been telling us, the password of the users. This was an active session, right? It gets this token and we're able to access it through the token. But of course, this gives you full access to that account. So now you can see stuff that's not made public. So, you have things that are displayed as, hey, we can show this to everybody, but maybe you have other stuff that's kind of hidden away. Maybe you have messenger stuff or private messages, those type of things that wouldn't necessarily be shared now may be exposed. Somebody's got access to that account. And we're really not going to discuss it right now, but there's also, to take this to the next level, if you're using something where you're using another application and you use the sign in with Facebook, there's a potential that that token could actually give you access to your account on those systems as well, based on how these access tokens are configured. But that's for a different time. Right now, I really want to kind of focus on what we saw and how we can try to look for this and how we can try to find this so it doesn't happen again. I know there's a lot of push. I already see in the news, government wants to know what happened. How could this possibly go down? Look, the reality is there's going to be flaws in your code. And especially when you have systems that are this large and you're spanning across different platforms. So you got mobile and you've got web and you've got all these different things. We're going to run into situations where flaws are going to get through. This is just the way it's going to be. Doesn't mean we're not trying to do security. It's just that at some point, something is going to get through. And of course, we want to try to prepare for that. So we know that this allowed access to accounts. We don't know really the extent of what accounts were actually accessed, what that information was used for. That's all stuff that we're going to have to wait for. At this point, really, There's not a lot of harm seen because all we know is the access was there. We kind of have to wait and see what actually comes out of this, of what that data may have been used for going forward, or what might have been there. So we don't really know that from there, that point. But some of the things I want to talk about was a few ways that we can maybe A, identify where these came from, B, some other mitigating controls that help protect us in these situations. And I don't know how many of these will actually apply directly to Facebook, but if you're building your own systems, some of these will apply to you to think about for implementing these things. And then again, answer some of those questions about, hey, how could this possibly slip through all these different cracks? So first I want to talk about just some of the mitigations. We know we have access to the account, but we really want to make sure that if somebody gains access to your account, we want to limit their capability to do certain things, right? Like change your password. So a lot of times password change features require the user to enter their current password before they can change their password. Most systems that I see do this. I've seen a few that actually don't still and don't require the current password, but it is definitely recommended that you require the current password before you allow changing the password to something else, just for situations like this. Somebody has gained access to your account, they didn't have your password, so we want to limit their ability to lock you out of your own account. So we want to make that much more difficult. So that is the first step that we can add to this. And again, a lot of sites already do this type of check. The next thing we want to think about is changing our email address, because oftentimes we use email address as our login. And this could go for the username as well, but especially with the email address, because we also use it for password reset. So if I can go in there and modify your email address, and then I can submit the password reset, I then get that reset email, and then I can follow the steps through and try to go ahead and reset your password. Now I can log in because I changed the email address of your account. Now, a lot of places don't require the password to change the email, something you may want to think about doing. It helps with cross-site request forgery, although we typically implement other controls for that. But it also helps lock down that email address, which is very important to our account, from being changed in this type of situation as well. So that's something you think about. Another thing to tack on to that is sending out emails when this type of information is changed. So when you change your password, when you change your email address, sending out an email to the current address that was on record saying, hey, your email address just changed. If this wasn't you, you need to contact us immediately. These type of things quickly allow us to see if somebody's gained access to our account, so we can hopefully take action to minimize the effect of what they've done. So that's just another one of those things that we can do, is sending out those email alerts. I know I've gotten email alerts before from a system when somebody's tried to do something or the account locked out, and it really alerted me very quickly. Rather than waiting till the next time I try to go log in and see that something happened, I got that alert quickly so I could go in and check my account. I could change my password, or I could do whatever I needed to do to feel confident again about what I'm doing. Now, we can also, with other settings, now we talked about email address, we talked about username, we talked about changing the password, but what if you have other configuration settings that are important? Maybe you've got kind of an admin section to your site where all your settings and your privacy settings and all that stuff are stored. Think about in the Facebook example, right? Change how my default posts are. Are they private? Are they public? Are they friends only? What if somebody goes in and modifies that and doesn't change anything else, and you don't realize that everything you're posting now is publicly available? I'm not sure the reasoning behind doing that type of attack, but it's possible. But all those settings, putting those admin configurations behind a password layer and saying, hey, you haven't been into this in a while, you're going to have to re-enter your password to get into these settings. Again, it's just another way to help reduce the effects of somebody hijacking your account without gaining your password first, right? So exactly this type of scenario. Somebody's gotten access in, but before they do anything sensitive, obviously I want them to re-authenticate to make sure that I know it is the user that's doing this. And there are a few systems out there that already do this. And, if you're not in those settings a lot, and you think about in Facebook and some of these other social media type sites, even a lot of your applications that you use on a daily basis, there's a lot of configuration settings, profile settings that you don't use very often. How often are you going into your profile? Probably not that much. So to require the password to go in and modify that data isn't going to be a huge overhead for most users because they're typically not in there doing that. That's a once in a year type of change that you might make. Otherwise, you don't touch it. So we can look at doing that type of stuff to help reduce that if we actually have the session hijacking going on, hopefully the risk of it will be a little bit lower. Yes, they're still gaining access to a lot of data. They can probably still post as you, right? There's all kinds of things that can happen, but hopefully we're minimizing that down, that in the event this happens, here's what we're limited to as far as the damage that can be done, which really helps it out. Because again, there's no 100% secure. At some point, there's going to be a vulnerability someplace. The goal is to help minimize that risk, that if it does happen, which hopefully is a low case, that risk is minimized. So some ways that we could have maybe tried to help identify this. I want to talk first requirements, design, that phase of the SDLC. When we're talking about these new features, right, if we look at something like a view as feature, it's kind of like a impersonation type feature. I'm gonna be able to, view the site as somebody else. So things like, hey, does document upload need to be there? Obviously, if I'm viewing a site as somebody else, I shouldn't be able to upload documents as them, right? So we want to make sure that we don't have that type of stuff. So looking at the feature set that exists and thinking about, hey, did these make sense? And so going back in and trying to figure out, hey, do we have requirements documents and design documents that lay this out and say, view as, what are the things that we're supposed to be doing? A lot of times in organizations, and listen, I was a developer for a long time. I get how it works. That napkin or that little sticky note comes across your desk and says, hey, we need this feature. And you just go ahead and do it. You don't really think about it. It's like, all right, somebody said do this. I throw it in there. And maybe it's really vague. Maybe I've seen systems, I've had systems thrown at me before where it's so vague as we just need a view as. And there's no description of what do we want that piece to do? What don't we want that piece to do? So it's kind of up to the application team to kind of make that happen and say, oh, okay, well, let me throw this in here. And somebody may get an idea of, oh, this would be a good idea, or this would be a good idea. And it kind of, forms from that, but there was no official documentation on it, or there was no security review of the documentation to say, hey, are you really, really sure we want to do this? And let's be honest, even if there was a security review of this, there's still a chance it could slip by. Remember, a lot of this stuff that we do from a review standpoint is heavily based on the people that are doing the reviewing, the experience they have, the skill sets they have, right? Somebody to be able to question this, and hindsight's 2020. It's easy to look back and say, oh, you shouldn't have had that. But when you're actually building the system, maybe you don't think about that. It would be interesting to see if we could block this out of everybody's mind and bring them that same thing, how many people would have said, yeah, that's okay, let's go through that. Okay, so it's not as easy as we make it sound after the fact, because there's lots of variables that go into this. So that's one area that we can make sure that we're really looking at to say, hey, let's make sure that these are the features that we want and how we want them to work. Then thinking about, okay, this thing generated an access token. So are there requirements around that access token? What limits do we want to put on that? This is a view as, so there should be no editing, there should be no uploading, there should be nothing. It's just you can view certain information, and that information must be limited down to what's publicly available anyway, not private related stuff. So now we know what our access token should and shouldn't be able to do, so we can make sure that we're doing proper tests around that access token, grabbing it and making sure. Now, there was mention of the mobile API as this access token had kind of the full privileges across the mobile API. Well, that even makes it more interesting because now you're crossing platforms, and with big companies especially, you have different groups that handle those different platforms. So maybe you're not looking at that side, and maybe there's a breakdown there of why are we not looking across the way, but that's a common issue amongst a lot of organizations because we kind of break those down. There's a mobile team, there's an API team, there's a web team, there's a UI team, right? There's all these different teams. So when you go across all these different teams, it makes it a little bit more difficult for some of that testing to be able to identify that. But as we look at that from a QA perspective, going in and saying, okay, I know what the access token should be. How do I go in and validate this is what we need it to be? So anybody doing any type of view as type system, these are some things that you'll want to think about before you move forward with yours, to lay out some of these test cases to make sure that you know what it is you're trying to do. And you have those requirements docs that are laying out this feature should be here or it shouldn't be there. And don't be afraid to question things if it doesn't seem right. So obviously now looking back, hey, if view as there's an upload, should we have an upload there? Like, that's something maybe we should question. And again, I think a lot of people probably wouldn't have questioned it before, although now they would tell you they would have just from hearing it. But if you weren't in that situation before, there's a good chance you may not have done that. So making sure that we have those requirements set up and that when we're testing it, we know what it is we're trying to test. Because if we don't have those test cases out in front of us, then sometimes we'll overlook those cases and we'll let things slip through. Now, again, this lasted, or it was in place for a little over a year. I think July of 2017 is when the functionality was added out there in the production realm. So that's a long time, a little over a year for something like that to be there. So I've seen some news articles and people asking questions and raising these questions about, oh, well, why didn't the pen testers find this? And why didn't the bug bounty hunters find this? And why didn't this find this? Well, here's the problem. This isn't something necessarily that's easy to find. So let's look at a couple of these, because I'm sure if you do a search, Facebook has job applications for an application security engineer position. The post talks about doing security analysis and security assessments on applications. So maybe you have internal staff that does it. So let's start there first. Maybe we have internal staff testing this. But again, a lot of testing, and this will go for all the testing that we're going to talk about, based on experience, based on knowledge of the systems, right? There's a lot that goes into our ability to test. Don't forget timelines and timeframes that we're given, the scopes that we're given. Are we given full reign to do testing? Facebook's a pretty big app. So are you just looking at specific parts? There's a lot that goes into determining what we're testing here. So we've got an internal team that obviously didn't find it, or if they found it, they hid it, but I doubt that. All right, but that's not uncommon, right? Again, we're not going to find everything. Even if you've got internal testers, they're not going to find it. I'm sure they run some sort of static analysis, didn't find it. Dynamic analysis, didn't find it, because this isn't just a simple indirect object reference type flaw. This is something that spans across multiple complexities, making it much more difficult to identify. So maybe the internal team doesn't see it. Maybe they're busy. Maybe they don't test that app very often. Lots of reasons why that may not have found that flaw. Okay, well, let's talk about external penetration testing. I'm sure a company as big as Facebook probably hires third-party companies to come in and test their apps to do a penetration test. This is common for a lot of companies. And look, penetration testing, I tell clients all the time, our goal is not to find every single vulnerability within your application. That's just not the goal of a vulnerability assessment, or a penetration test. I apologize. That's more of a vulnerability assessment type thing when you're throwing your scanners and all that stuff at it. Right? Penetration tests are typically aimed at trying to reach a certain level, gain access to sensitive data. Yes, it is a goal to try to take over accounts and that type of thing. But you have to remember that, especially with most penetration tests, they're not ongoing all the time. Oftentimes, they're limited in scope and what you can do. They're limited in time frames. So maybe you've got a week, maybe you've got a month, maybe you've got 2 months. I don't know how long you give, but each test is different. But you've got a boxed amount of time to be able to test this mass amount of system. You're not going to test every single input, all that stuff. If you are, you're testing it with automated tools, which aren't going to find this, right? So there's a lot that goes into this capability that's out there. And when you talk about a penetration test, again, we talk about skill set of the people doing the work, the types of testing that they're doing, all that. There's a good chance that this type of flaw can sneak through during a pen test. They're not going to find everything that's out there. It's just not possible to be able to do that, okay? For me, when I talk about penetration testing, it's a verification of the controls we put in place. Are we doing what we think we're doing? what else are we not doing that we didn't realize and that we should be doing? But finding a bug like this embedded deep down, that's kind of hit or miss. Doesn't matter what company you bring in to do it. I promise you, 9 out of 10 probably would not have found this either. So not knowing what these look like, what the actual code looked like or anything like that, my guess is still a lot of people still would not have found this through a third-party pen test, which, I mean, is okay, right? Like I said, I mean, that's not necessarily the ultimate goal. We are very time-boxed on the test. And oftentimes, your test may not include things like the mobile API or some other pieces. It may be limited to Facebook.com and nothing else. So if it crosses platforms, we're not going to see that. I've had that in multiple tests where I say, look, if you got mobile apps and you got the web app and they, talk to the same systems, I want to test them all at the same time so we can test kind of across those platforms to make sure that we're good. Because when you test in that silo, you miss out on what might happen over in another piece. Maybe we didn't see that access was greater over here because of that. I've had a test in the past where we found from a mobile app the secret key to be able to make our requests out to the API to give us any rights we wanted in our system. And if we didn't have the mobile app as part of that, we would have never found that based on the current scoping that we had for the assessment. So these type of things can lead us to not seeing that. So penetration testing, not necessarily going to find it. So don't throw it out there as, oh, I can't believe penetration just didn't find this. It also depends how often you do it. Again, lots of variables that go in this. Well, let's talk about bug bounties. Okay, Facebook's notorious for being supporters of bug bounty programs. They've paid out a lot of money over the years, since 2011 or so, when they started offering bug bounty program to people out there. Okay, bug bounty program, that's great. You've got people looking at it. They've paid out, I know at least one of the flaws they paid out was $15,000 for the ability to gain access to account or do something to an account. So with that being said, we know that if somebody had found this, it would have been worth a lot from a bug bounty payout. So it's out there. The problem is, and I don't talk about bug bounties very often, but the problem is, you have bug bounties. Again, it's limited to skill set. Also, they've had a bug bounty program since 2011. So you've got all this stuff that's kind of been picked over, and now you're hoping that whoever's out there, and I think I saw one article talk about over 800 different people that have participated in the bug bounty program. So there's a lot of people looking, but you still have to know where to look and how long do you keep looking. If you're doing a bug bounty, you only get paid if you find something, and if you find something that's not a duplicate and there's no argument over it. And so, it's a process to get paid for the amount of time that you may put in up front to find something. So when you've had a program in place for a long time, there's, less motivation oftentimes for people to come in and try to test because there's not a lot left there. What's really left is this type of flaw, this really big, juicy flaw that's sitting there that isn't something that I'm just going to, I just stumbled on the site and I found this. And so even with a bug bounty program, if you don't have the people with the skill sets to be able to find this, and if you do have the people with the skill sets to find this, but they're not looking in the right place, then again, you run the risk that, okay, we might not find this. And that's something that, there's always been this war between penetration testing and bug bounties, and, everybody's switching to, I want to do a bug bounty because it's going to save everything. It's no different than a penetration test in that form, that it's not going to find everything, right? It's not the end-all solution. We talk about bug bounties all the time, and the fact that, most companies aren't even ready for a bug bounty program yet because they haven't kind of taken care of the internal stuff that they need to have. So once you reach that maturity, then great, put it out there, because now that's when you want to start finding some of this stuff. So I just want to point out from that standpoint that penetration testing, may not find this stuff. They're not the end-all be-all of finding all the security flaws in your app. Dynamic analysis, static analysis, bug bounty programs, they're all pieces of building a strong, mature application security program. But again, none of them, even combined, are going to provide you 100% coverage for 100% of the type of vulnerabilities that may exist. Now, we may find later on that maybe they knew about this and didn't fix it. I don't know if that'll be true or not, but there's always that possibility. I'm not sure whether it'll go. We'll kind of have to wait and see. But from now, we just kind of have to look at what we know about what's going on. We understand kind of the current effect, what it has potentially on our accounts, how many people it hit. And really, for me, it's sharing this information and trying to do a realistic breakdown of what's happening, what may have been affected. So you can take this back, one, to if you have an account, what steps do you want to take? Where do you want to go from this? If you don't, but you're a builder and you're building your own applications, or you work for an organization that's building applications, then we want to think about how we can take some of this information and go back and check our processes to make sure that we're doing what we think we should be doing. Look at your requirements when you talk about these types of features and think about what type of attack or how this, if it got breached, could affect my system. What type of tests could I implement? I was going through this with one of my training classes, using this as an example, asking everybody, hey, what type of tests would you implement to try to help identify this later on? Run through those type of exercises within your own organization. Talk about it and try to think, hey, if we were doing something like this, what type of tests could we put in place to try to help identify this beforehand? What type of requirements, or is there a portion of our requirements phase that we could have added something in where maybe we could identify this happening and make sure we check those access tokens a little bit more stringently, or something to that effect, to help make sure that we don't get this vulnerability within our application going forward. But again, it's security. It's never 100%. Stuff is going to slip by. Our best bet is doing as much as we can, improving these processes, improving our secure development, improving our requirements gathering, our designing, improving our ability to do security testing within the QA group to make sure that we got everything where we need it to be. That's the stuff that we need to focus on to make sure that we're showing that we're protecting the data. There's all this talk all the time about, they don't take it seriously. They're not, protecting our data. They prove they can't do it, right? There's a lot of opinion thrown out there. I look at what's the organization doing. If you've got a lot of stuff in place, you show you're working towards actually doing stuff, look, you're going to have a breach at some point because something is going to slip through. And if you're huge, like a Facebook or some of these other social media companies where you have tons of data and lots of information somebody may want, given enough time, they're going to find a way to get in and get that data. That's just a fact of how things work in the security world and in the organizations. So we kind of have to be prepared for that and realize that we got to do what we can do to try to help bring this down, protect our stuff, but there's still always going to be a level of risk there within our organization to all the data that we have. We're just doing our best job to protect it. So hopefully that was informational. Take it for what it is. A lot of information kind of thrown at you there to see what you want to do. As far as what you want to do with your Facebook accounts, I don't care what you do either way. I see people out there saying delete your accounts. Look, we live in a world where everybody's got their opinion on everything about it. Lots of people suggesting, that you change your password right away. I'm not saying don't change your password. If you feel uncomfortable and you want to change your password, you can change your password. So far, everything I've seen, nothing indicates that the password's compromised. But if it makes you feel better, you can change your password. That's certainly not a bad idea, especially if you're using a password manager. Go ahead and change your password. We don't recommend anymore changing your password every 30 days or 60 days. But if you feel concerned, go ahead and change it. That's what I do. I go in, I change my password. If I feel like there's a concern for an account I have. Other recommendations have been make sure you use two-factor authentication. I'm a huge fan of two-factor authentication. You hear me talk about it all the time. Use two-factor authentication. To be fair, in this situation, two-factor authentication wouldn't have made a difference. Your account still would have been compromised because the access token is what was grabbed, which is all after the two-factor takes place. That doesn't mean we still shouldn't implement two-factor authentication, right? If you've got it and you can do it, I would definitely use two-factor authentication on any accounts that you have. So, hey, if you have any questions or any thoughts on any of this stuff, please feel free to reach out. Hit me up, james@developsec.com, or check out our website out at www.developsec.com. And we'll talk to you out on the next episode.